Al Capone, the untold true story of the legendary Mafia kingpin. Introduction: Chicago's Underworld. In the roaring 1920s, Chicago was a city of wealth, ambition, and danger. The streets thrived with jazz, speakeasies, and a booming underground economy fueled by the prohibition of alcohol. While most people saw glitz and glamour, beneath the surface, a deadly battle for control over the city's criminal enterprises was underway. One name would soon become synonymous with power, fear, and ruthless ambition: Al Capone. Born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1899, Alphonse Gabriel Capone entered the world of crime as a teenager. By his early 20s, he had already gained notoriety for his cunning and violence, establishing a reputation that would eventually reshape the underworld of Chicago forever. The rise of Al Capone. Capone's journey to power began under the mentorship of Johnny Torrio, a seasoned gangster who controlled much of Chicago's organized crime. Torrio recognized Capone's potential, his intelligence, and his ability to enforce rules through fear and strategy. In 1925, after a failed assassination attempt on Torrio, Capone took over the Chicago outfit, a criminal empire that controlled illegal gambling, prostitution, and most importantly, the bootlegging of alcohol. From the beginning, Capone understood that power meant not just money, but control over people, influence over law enforcement, and dominance over rival gangs. Among his fiercest competitors was the North Side Gang, led by the shrewd and defiant Bugs Moran. Capone and Moran's rivalry would escalate to an event that shocked the nation and cemented Capone's place in history. Prohibition in the bootlegging empire. The Prohibition era created a lucrative opportunity for organized crime. While the nation was dry, Chicago's underground thrived. Capone built his empire meticulously, supplying illegal alcohol to speakeasies across the city. He bribed police officers, judges, and politicians, ensuring that law enforcement often turned a blind eye to his operations. But Capone's empire wasn't built solely on charm and connections. Violence was a language he spoke fluently. Those who defied him or encroached on his territory quickly learned the cost of rebellion. Murders, drive-by shootings, and bombings became daily news in Chicago. Capone's name was feared in every alley, club, and boardroom. Yet despite the brutality, he presented himself as a businessman, a protector of his community, and a philanthropist to some, solidifying his legendary persona. The lead up to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. By 1929, tensions between Capone and Moran had reached their peak. Moran's North Side Gang had resisted Capone's domination, and the city's streets became a battlefield. Capone needed a decisive move, one that would crush his rival and secure his grip on Chicago's underworld once and for all. In the weeks leading up to February 14, meticulous planning took place. Hitmen were recruited, cars were acquired, and an abandoned warehouse on North Clark Street was chosen as the stage for the deadly confrontation. Every detail was calculated to maximize fear, send a message, and minimize risk to Capone himself. The city waited in oblivion, unaware that the course of criminal history was about to be rewritten. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On the morning of February 14, 1929, 7 members of Moran's North Side Gang gathered at the warehouse. 2 men dressed as police officers entered the building, ordering everyone to line up against the wall. Within moments, the hitmen opened fire with Thompson submachine guns, unleashing a torrent of bullets that echoed through the warehouse. When the shooting stopped, 7 men lay dead, their bodies riddled with dozens of bullets. 1 man miraculously survived, crawling to safety, and the chaos spread panic through Chicago. Newspapers the next day screamed headlines of the massacre. The city was horrified, and the brutality of the attack cemented Al Capone's reputation as a ruthless and untouchable gangster. Though Capone was widely suspected to be behind the massacre, he carefully maintained his distance, avoiding direct evidence and ensuring the law could not touch him. Aftermath and investigation. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre sent shockwaves throughout the country. Police investigations yielded little, thanks to Capone's meticulous planning and the code of silence that permeated the criminal underworld. Bugs Moran survived, but his power was shattered, and the North Side Gang was significantly weakened. Public outrage grew, and calls for law enforcement action became louder. Yet despite the fear he inspired, Capone continued to conduct his empire with unprecedented confidence. Bribery, manipulation, and intimidation allowed him to remain untouchable. The massacre became a symbol of the era, a defining moment that illustrated both the scale of organized crime and Capone's dominance over it. Impact on Al Capone and Chicago crime. In the wake of the massacre, Al Capone's power surged. His control over bootlegging, gambling, and other illicit activities grew stronger than ever. Rival gangs either submitted, fled, or faced violent retribution. Chicago became the stage for a criminal empire that operated with precision, fear, and influence. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, began to focus their attention on Capone, but he remained elusive. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre not only removed a key rival but also sent a message to the world: challenging Al Capone was a death sentence. His name became legendary, and his methods became a blueprint for organized crime in America. Conclusion: Legacy of Al Capone. Al Capone's story is one of ambition, strategy, and ruthless power. From his rise in Brooklyn to becoming Chicago's most feared gangster, he shaped the criminal world in ways that would be remembered for generations. While the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is perhaps the most infamous chapter, his life was a tapestry of influence, crime, and calculated brutality. Capone became a symbol of both fear and fascination, a man who controlled an empire while evading the law for years. Today, historians, authors, and true crime enthusiasts study his life not just for the violence, but for the strategy, cunning, and audacity that defined him. Al Capone's legacy remains a stark reminder of the power of ambition and the dark allure of the underworld. After the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the illusion of Al Capone being merely a shadowy businessman completely collapsed. The bloodshed forced the American public, politicians, and federal authorities to finally confront the reality of organized crime. Chicago was no longer just a city with gang problems, it had become the capital of American underworld violence, and Al Capone was its most recognizable face. Despite public outrage, Capone did not slow down. In fact, his operations expanded. By 1930, his bootlegging empire was earning an estimated $60 million a year, an astronomical sum for the time. His organization controlled breweries, trucking routes, speakeasies, gambling dens, and brothels across Chicago. Capone ran his empire like a corporation, with managers, accountants, enforcers, and strict discipline. Loyalty was rewarded generously, while betrayal was met with swift and brutal punishment. Capone also understood the power of public image. While he ruled the underworld with violence, he carefully cultivated a reputation as a generous and charismatic figure. During the Great Depression, he opened soup kitchens that fed thousands of unemployed citizens. Newspapers often photographed him smiling, dressed in expensive suits, presenting himself as a successful entrepreneur rather than a criminal. This dual identity confused the public and frustrated law enforcement, as many ordinary people saw him as a folk hero rather than a gangster. Behind the scenes, however, Capone's paranoia grew. The massacre had eliminated his strongest rival, but it also painted a massive target on his back. Federal agencies, unable to connect him directly to murders, shifted their focus to his finances. The government realized that if they could not prove his violent crimes, they could destroy him through tax evasion. At the same time, internal tensions within the Chicago outfit began to surface. Power attracts ambition, and Capone's lieutenants were not immune to greed. Frank Nitti, Paul Ricca, and other high-ranking members quietly prepared for a future without Capone, knowing that his growing notoriety made him vulnerable. While they remained loyal publicly, they positioned themselves strategically within the organization. In 1931, the government finally struck. After years of surveillance, financial investigations, and witness testimonies, Al Capone was indicted on charges of tax evasion. The trial became a national spectacle. For the first time, the man who had evaded justice through bribery and intimidation stood powerless before the federal court. Witnesses testified about his lavish lifestyle, his unexplained wealth, and his failure to pay taxes on millions of dollars in income. Capone attempted to manipulate the system as he had done countless times before. He tried to bribe jurors, intimidate witnesses, and delay proceedings. But this time, the system fought back. In a dramatic move, the judge replaced the entire jury at the last moment to prevent corruption. It was a turning point that Capone could not control. The verdict was devastating. Al Capone was found guilty and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever given for tax evasion at that time. The once untouchable kingpin was stripped of his power, his empire, and his freedom. Chicago's underworld shifted overnight, as leadership quietly passed to other figures who preferred secrecy over fame. Capone was initially sent to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, where he still attempted to exert influence. But his behavior led authorities to transfer him to Alcatraz, the most secure prison in America. Isolated from his network and cut off from communication, Capone's power finally dissolved. The man who once controlled an empire now scrubbed floors and followed orders. While imprisoned, Capone's health deteriorated rapidly. Years of untreated syphilis damaged his nervous system, affecting his memory, speech, and mental stability. Guards and fellow inmates noticed his decline. The feared gangster became a shadow of his former self, often confused and withdrawn. In 1939, after serving most of his sentence, Capone was released due to his failing health. He returned to Florida, where he lived quietly under medical supervision. The world he once ruled had moved on. Organized crime still existed, but it had learned from Capone's mistakes. Future mob bosses avoided the spotlight, choosing silence and invisibility over public fame. Al Capone died on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his legend. Historians continue to debate whether he was a criminal mastermind, a product of his time, or a symbol of America's failed Prohibition experiment. The story of Al Capone is not just about violence and crime. It is a cautionary tale about power, ambition, and the consequences of believing oneself untouchable. His rise showed how quickly influence can be built in chaos, and his fall proved that no empire, no matter how powerful, can escape accountability forever. Long after the gunshots faded and the speakeasies closed, Al Capone remained a permanent figure in history. A man who ruled Chicago's underworld, challenged the American legal system, and left behind a legacy that still defines the mythology of organized crime.